Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Odin's Movie Blog. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you're doing well, and today we're going to be talking about the Terminator box office, specifically that box office in China, which apparently is coming in way under expectations, and it looks like this film is indeed set not only to be another flop for the year of 2019, but potentially the lowest grossing film of any Terminator film of all time. Of course, we look back to a few years ago when Terminator Genesis came out, and those numbers were okay to the point of it barely breaking even at best. Really, it's the best thing you could possibly say about it. But we all know that that film probably was able to sell enough copies on DVD and on Blu-ray, and also, of course, all the streaming deals that were going on still at that time in history, where you could actually have a place like TNT, TBS, or one of those stations, right, that would buy the rights to be able to stream the movies every now and then. Those deals usually equaled millions of dollars, and so they were able to make up some of the losses. And this goes for a lot of films and a lot of studios, and they were able to make up for any losses that they may have had in a theater. It's going to be interesting to see where that goes forward, especially with the streaming wars now going in full effect, especially over the next year or so, with HBO Max being the next, I think, gigantic one, other than, of course, what we have coming out pretty soon in Disney Plus and a couple of other streaming services that already still exist, like Netflix and Amazon Prime. HBO Max seems to be the next major one, but the problem with it is that you see, or we'll start to see, certain movies under certain franchises, under certain movie studios that won't get that same level of money back, essentially, because instead of there being sold to another company to be shown, it's going to be put into, and it's going to be all in-house, basically. It's all going to be a part of that system. So it's going to be interesting to see if Terminator Dark Fate is actually even going to be able to make its money back, because I don't think the Blu-ray or DVD sales are going to be incredibly strong for this, because they've already shown that they've basically killed off any fan love that still existed for this franchise, especially with these opening scores. We talked a little bit about how on Thursday it came out to the tune of around $2.4 or so million, which, just keep in mind that the next film after that came in at 1.8, and it was The Joker, which made $1.8 million in its about fourth week, and it was a weekday. That's really bad. That's really, really bad for a brand new film, a Terminator film at that, a giant franchise with a giant budget of $185 million, to be doing that poorly on a Thursday evening. Well, now we've got some numbers coming in from China. Now we start to see where I thought would be the only saving grace that this film could possibly have, because for those that don't remember, Genesis made around $100 million in China, which is not crazy amounts of money, but still enough nonetheless. It was able to make up about a third, if not more, of the entire foreign total in that one country. So China is usually a pretty big powerhouse for these types of films. However, early estimates are speculating that it'll make only $19 million in China this weekend, which apparently will be under the $30 to $40 million it was projected to make in that country alone. If it's not going to be making those numbers, then it likely won't even come close to the $100 million of Genesis. And if it doesn't perform there in China, which it was the only saving grace it had, and it doesn't perform well in other countries, which is remaining consistent, and it doesn't perform in the US, which we know already based on the projections of it making around $28 million this weekend, which again is well below expectations, we're looking at a film that might barely be able to reach the $400 million mark, if even that. In a year with films like Gemini Man, which can barely reach the $200 million mark, it's interesting that these giant big budget films are starting to fall so flat on their faces, especially this one, because this is a film that's a part of a franchise that is pretty well known, especially by American audiences. And what I think the studios have really failed to see and understand is that people are just tired of the same franchises being used and abused by the studios to make a quick buck, and them not actually putting any thought or effort into the storytelling process. You can tell us all you want about how James Cameron was attached to it, and James Cameron and Tim Miller butted heads in production, and it was James Cameron's production by the end of it, etc. And they're going to keep on doing that, right? They're going to keep on trying to spin the story and push any blame away from themselves, right? They will not blame themselves or take the blame on for themselves. And if they do, obviously I will give them credit for it, but it's not likely going to happen. You're either going to have that happen, or you're going to have them blame the fans and say, oh, it's just because all the fan base are older and white and are toxic. That's pretty much what we've gotten to in today's standards, right? Everything has to be about race and gender. And if you don't support a franchise, like, for example, Ghostbusters 2016, people said, the reason why that film flopped was because the audiences were sexist and racist. Which is anything but true, because the movie itself was terrible. It had terrible word of mouth. No one wanted it in the first place, and it was only ever made for a specific agenda. It was very clear what that agenda was. Dark Fate seems to have been the same way. Now, I'm hearing a lot of different conflicting reports about whether it's woke or not. I've heard some people say it's really not as bad as the marketing makes it out to be, but then I've also heard from other people that I really genuinely trust that it is just as woke as the marketing seems to let on. And then you have other people that I really trust. I mentioned before, John Flickinger, good friend of the channel. He, in his review, just said it's a terrible movie. Like, politics aside, it's just not a good movie, and he is a diehard Terminator fan. And to me, I feel like when I eventually see this film, because I do want to see it eventually, because obviously I want to have my own opinion on the film, and whether or not it's through paying it at the theater or doing some other means, allegedly, of course, I do eventually want my eyes to be to be experiencing the film. But for someone like him to say, I'm not a part of any Phantom Menace, I'm not a part of any of these different groups of people, these different cliques online on YouTube or anything like that, I'm just my own individual person and a Terminator fan, for him to say those kind of words, for him to say that, and for other people like him to say that, to me speaks the highest volumes, right? To me, that speaks the loudest. Because what it really shows you is the disconnect between the studio and between the actual Terminator fans themselves. And if they're not careful, they're going to start to turn fans off so much that even if they were, let's say in 5 years, because they're going to try they're going to try it again. Even though James Cameron probably doesn't want them to, he makes a quick buck off of it, so I'm sure he doesn't mind it that much, and Lord knows he needs that money if he wants to keep on producing Avatar for the rest of his life, which, dear Lord, why? But that they're going to go and try and make another film in the next 3 to 5 years. And all I can say is that if you want to have any chance of that film being successful at all, you got to start to at least come to truth about this, saying, hey, we tried this, we had an agenda with this film, we admit it, and it was a big mistake on our part. They're not going to do that, unfortunately, but if they did, I, at the very least, would listen. As a fan, I would say, hey, you recognized your mistakes. You're going to go somewhere new in the direction. You're going to go more traditional in your next film, and hopefully you're going to tell us a story that's actually worth telling. To be honest, though, I'm at the point in my fandom where I say, just stop. Seriously, just stop and just come out and say T1 and T2 are the only canon films. Everything else took place in just some fever dream that John Connor had. Like, seriously, if that's how you explain it away, I would be okay with that, because at the end of the day, I really don't need any of this just complete and utter nonsense that's being told anymore. I do want to just dive into an article real quick, because I have mentioned a few numbers and a few statistics, and it is important, I think, to always try and be as fair and as balanced as I possibly can. I'm sure I'm going to trigger some people with those phrases, even though I mean it in all honesty. I really do think that it's important for us to always be able to cite our sources and show everything up in the in the long run. So as you can see from here, from Deadline, how Terminator Dark Fate conked out. So this is coming from Deadline. Hardly a Phantom Menace source, hardly a conservative outlet, right? This is a website that literally just covers box office, pop culture, etc. Conked out with $27+ million opening weekend, and why The Irishman is not missed at the box office, so it's going to try and say some things about that. But this is the section that I want to focus on. So this is the third update of the Saturday AM. The chart will post later. It's not a good weekend for franchises, specifically old dusty ones, as the sixth Terminator movie, Dark Fate, is seeing an awful future at the weekend domestic box office with 27.1. That's awful. So keep in mind that the original estimate was around in the 30s of millions of dollars here in the United States. It was then 28 million. Now the new estimate is that it's going to even come below that at $27.1 million. You do realize that now we're getting to the point where Dark Fate could potentially make less than what Genesis made in its opening weekend. Genesis came out with competition, but Genesis also came out during the summer. So the fact that you have a film like this that has no competition really right now, of course, I would consider films like The Joker to be competition because it's just a great film that everyone is still going to see. But Lord, this is just anemic for this franchise that really just needs to stop at the end of the day. A terrible result for a planned Paramount, Skydance Media, Fox tentpole that reportedly cost $185 million, and some even say $196, and both of those numbers are without marketing. You're looking at a film that could potentially have cost around $300 million by the end of adding up all the digits when you include marketing. And I hear worldwide global audiences are turning their noses up as well. China's box office is now estimated to be $19.4 million. With estimates having been that it would make 30 million or originally 40 to 50 million that some were expecting. The Disney Fox hoping they would hit 40 million from 36 territories. So Fox Disney is a part of this deal. So even though this is indeed a Paramount project, Paramount is the one that I know this for, it is also being done in association with Fox and Disney. It's interesting that Disney was not able to to fix the races in China like they've been able to do with a lot of their other films. It could be that Chinese audiences are a little bit smarter than the average audiences here in the United States. Some people might say, whoa, what are you trying to say there? What I'm trying to say is that they tend to be a little bit more sensitive to woke culture. They tend to be a little bit more sensitive to ideological films. And they tend not to support those types of films. That's the reason why they wouldn't show up for films like Ghostbusters 2016 had it been released there. They wouldn't have shown up. They haven't shown up in the past for other films that have had agendas behind them. And, great example of that is also Star Wars, too. Star Wars, it's been less and less and less in that country because they're just like, okay, we don't really understand what the big deal is. And there's a lot of other factors, of course, that go into it. But I do think that them being more sensitive to that aspect is definitely something that could have an impact. But the fact that this film is not doing well here. And here we have a little bit more information too. It says that they were hoping to make a lot more. Japan is the only market left, and I doubt it's going to make enough money in Japan to make up for what it's losing in China and these other countries. The break even for Dark Fate lies around $470 million. And this is the film that might barely make the $400 million mark, and that is going to be extremely generous. That 470 number is extremely generous, and the reason why is because if the budget was 196. Let's assume then we can round up to 200. That means that it costs $300 million to make. You have to make, therefore, twice that amount essentially back because you only get 60% of the box office back anyway because of all the deals with theaters in the various countries. So you're looking at a film that might even have to make closer to $500 million in order to break even, and there's just no chance in hell with the numbers that are coming in right now and the competition coming up later this month, especially with films like Dr. Sleep coming out next week. There's just really no room for this film to make any more money at this point in time. And then it says there, and that's with lofty Cameron Arnold Schwarzenegger participations in the 8 to 9% range. So I would assume that means that they get about 8 to 9% of the total commission of the film, meaning that it's actually probably even more than that number, and they're still being very, very generous. The point is this. This film is bleeding money. No one is going to see this film because no one likes Terminator anymore. And it really has nothing to do with the Terminator as a franchise. Because when we talk about T1, T2, we still love those movies. But the problem now is that we have a studio, and several studios at that have been so obsessed with trying to push sequels after sequels after sequels, prequels, reboots, remakes down our throats. And for certain franchises, it's not working anymore. The franchise for Terminator, the hardcore fans were really lost, I think, over the last several films. Genesis, I think, was the last straw for a lot of people, which is why that's the last film that probably we could say made money. This is going to be the first Terminator film that will lose money. And when you look and see the agendas that were behind it, all of the different narratives they try to push, all the different things they try to say, what Tim Miller himself said behind the camera or in the interview process about, how we're to make the toxic white male community cry, and this film's going to be terrible. Like, this film's going to make them cry. If anyone's crying right now, it's anyone attached to this film. And I feel really bad for anyone that worked on the technical side of it, some of the actors in the film as well, because it's not their fault. It's not their fault their director couldn't keep his mouth shut, had to politicize this film even more so what the marketing team already did. It's not their fault that the marketing team had to, basically make it into a political narrative in the first place. And it's really sad that these studios are really screwing over some hardworking people in the movie industry, all because they want to push their own social agendas. It's really sad. But anyway, what are y'all's thoughts about this? Again, it's not performing well at all domestically, but now the bigger concern here for the film and for the studio at this point is the fact that China is also not showing up. It's making half, projected now to make half of what it was expected to make. That's extremely anemic. The number for this weekend domestically is getting lower and lower every single day. It will probably end around that $27 million mark. Could be a little higher, could be a little lower. But regardless, the film is not capturing the hearts and minds of people. It's amazing that they go ahead and try and point to, the Rotten Tomatoes score, the audience score is pretty high. Even when you take into account that those are only verified scores, and we all know Rotten Tomatoes loves to control the narrative when it comes to certain films. And when you actually look to the raw score overall, it drops about 20 points. I think this. Are there some good things in this film that some people might like? Sure, I could see that being the case, especially when it comes to visual effects and especially when it comes to action. But overall, it's heartless. Hearing what I've heard about the first 5 minutes of the film with a character being killed off right at the bat, and it essentially saying, "Patooey, I spit at you," to the fan base, I can imagine, and I can totally understand why so many fans are saying, yeah, you know what? If that's what they think of us, I'm not going to support you anymore, and that's pretty much how I feel. So let me know your thoughts about this. Do you think that they have really crapped the bed here? How much do you think it's going to make in China? There's a chance that it could only reach the max of $50 million in China, which is really bad. That's half of what Genesis made, and Genesis, by all accounts, was not a good film. So that should tell you a lot about not just this film, but also about the environment that these studios have created because of their greed at this point in time. We'd love to hear your thoughts about this stuff and all the things we talked about in the comment section below. If you like this video, smash that like button, give me a subscribe, it helps me out a lot. You're all amazing and beautiful people. Have a wonderful day. And as always, God bless.